Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hello, Annie.
No
Good to
worries.
be here again.
I am pleased that you are here, Robert. Thank you for joining us. And brother Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, hi, Arnie. How are you? We're having beautiful weather here, by the way. That's lovely.
Mhm.
But anyway, I understand that you were posing us with a pretty heavy topic today. It's quite awesome. We'll see what we can do with it.
That's it. Savings and charity. That's right. The
Yeah.
the the topic. And prior to us starting this recorded forum, we're actually discussing all these facets of saving and charity, and we were in negotiation about the title. And it is interesting because it is so encompassing of so many different points of view. But I'm going to let the brothers Clink open up the floor. Wallace.
Well, I guess maybe there's all sorts of ways you can approach this, but I would say we're facing a problem in the economy, in the financial aspect of the economy, where we have a shortage of purchasing power.
Hmm.
And this shortage of purchasing power leads us to all sorts of economic, hardship on with regard to different sectors of the community, less advantaged ones. And actually, savings as such is a major, if not the major cause of the shortage of purchasing power, which causes the difficulties which lead to such a drive for charity. Because charity comes about when you feel someone is not, really participating in life to the extent that they should be able to do, and you exercise compassion and you share what you have. But unfortunately, when you share what you have, you are sharing what is not sufficient as a whole from an economic perspective, looking at the economy as a whole, because there is insufficient purchasing power by which the community as a whole can access what they are producing or what they could produce.
Hmm. That's an interesting opening salvo, Wally. That savings and charity, and with charity, all we're doing is we're assisting people. In other words, we're taking from ourselves, if you like, to assist others, but it's not actually dealing with the outstanding issue, and that is a chronic shortage of purchasing power. Robert.
That's right. Uh, the problem we're faced with, I think, is that there is a desire on the part of the sort of oligarchs of society to keep people in a state of precarious existence. And therefore, they keep them alienated from the abundance that the productive system could provide today. Uh, the emphasis is on uh, security when you're talking about savings, and you're being encouraged to provide for your own security. But this takes a very narrow perspective on the means of obtaining security, because if you're relying solely on your own resources, you're not looking at the broader picture of what's going on in the economy.
Hmm.
So it's a very important thing to recognize that if you think you are going to provide for yourself adequately through saving, then you're not looking at the cultural inheritance, which is the true basis of our security, not some money that we can lay by in the hope that we'll have it still in the future and that it will be of some worth at that time.
Mm. I recently went for a drive through some states in Australia, and I went through an area called the Riverina, and it's part of the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Authority. The project itself was damming up two rivers to drought-proof the food supply on the eastern side of Australia, to drought-proof
Mhm.
it. This to me was actually an act of saving, if you like. It was an act of domestic security within the nation of Australia. So dam up the water, hold it up during the winter, store it, and of course with the snow, if there was any snow melt and things like that, you had an ongoing supply of water, and then you could gradually release the water through canals to the irrigation areas and ensure constant food supply. That to me was if you like, it was an act of security or savings by the community, by the nation. And if you look on that and you're thinking, of course, if we've got a stable food and water supply, then we look at, say, something like energy, and we've got vast amounts of coal in Australia, vast amounts, or shale oil, and we could build power generation all over the place and have security there as well. So to me, the idea of savings is placing our faith in coinage or notes, when in actual fact the resources that we have secures our future. The resources we have, the inheritance that previous generations have actually built up for us. Anyway, they're my thoughts. Wally.
Well, the problem, yeah, I think you're getting to it there. When you think about savings, you have to differentiate between monetary savings and actual physical savings.
Mm-hmm.
And when you save money, there is no indication necessarily that a corresponding physical process is going on. When you save money, you are allegedly, you're doing it to secure your future. But in fact, what you're doing is you're depriving the producers of the necessary revenue that they need in order to recover their costs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you impair their ability to produce. So it's not a wise form of savings. It's necessary that you, as has been said, you have to put up enough seed for next year's crop. But under the present system, we are forced to produce more and more so that we can access what we already have produced. And it's not just that we have to do it, we have to do it more and more and more on an exponential basis, because we are modernizing our economy. And in so doing, we are increasing non-labor costs, which means that we are making the deficiency of consumer buying power even further exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
And so savings, in terms of saving money, is not the solution to our problem. The solution to our problem is to ensure at the final stage of production that people have sufficient income to buy the production, and to allow the producer, because the producer has borrowed money, he has a bank loan, which has enabled him to gather the resources required from the community in order to go through the process of producing what he produces. And he has to repay that bank loan. And the bank insists that it must be repaid. And so that if you don't have the market at the end of the cycle, you can't pay your bank loan. And you know, when you can't pay your bank loan, that's not good news. You end up going into receivership. And then you're not doing anything for anybody because you've been deactivated as a producing unit. So, so the problem is so financial saving, and furthermore, it can get quite complicated actually. But one of the authors who's particularly good on it is a man called A.W. Joseph. He has a master's degree and a Bachelor of Science, and he is a member of the Birmingham Actuarial Society, which is an accounting society, and he has done a very good job, which Douglas endorsed, in explaining the process of how savings in its various forms creates the shortage of purchasing power. But Joseph does say, he says, Major Douglas has, however, discovered a shorter analysis, which cuts through many of these complexities which between Douglas's treatment and the usual arguments that costs and purchasing power are considered as a flow through the productive system. That's Douglas's position. In other words, Douglas has taken sort of he's developed a theorem, a general statement, which explains why the flow of costs and prices is increasingly greater than the flow of incomes.
Mm-hmm.
You can go into it, make it very complicated. You can go into higher mathematics, and you can make it incomprehensible for the average person. But Douglas has explained, if you look at the flow of prices and the flow of incomes, you will see just by straight accountancy, which he determined
Mm-hmm.
by examining about 100 different corporations.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it is. You're producing prices at a far greater rate than you are distributing income. And then you have to explain why, and that's when you get into a more complex analysis of the process. But what people first have to understand is that there is a deficiency, and that they are being asked to make up the deficiency by mortgaging their future, by going into debt to the banks, and by producing more and more goods, which may or may not, and are increasingly irrelevant or even destructive, in order to get the financial incomes to buy what they produced in the past, because they don't have enough incomes without doing further work.
Yeah.
And so it means that we're on a treadmill, and the treadmill is being tipped up, 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 and we're running faster and faster, and we're slipping down all the time. We're losing the battle. And we're doing it because of an error in industrial cost accountancy.
Yeah.
It's completely unnecessary. I had a marvelous talk with a young lady today, and she was really interested. She's in technology. She's training herself right now. But she really seemed to grasp what I was saying, and she understood the implications. I say I talk to young people because I realize that we're in a trend, and it's a trend that is in a one-way trend, and it's getting worse all the time.
Yeah.
And I know you're facing dreadful problems ahead of you, and I said you should, with all the marvelous potential we have, and with all the capacity for providing goods and services, we should have a marvelous future, and it shouldn't be sacrificed or sabotaged by some erroneous system of tallying up our accounts.
Yeah.
It's just it's a form of. She used the word actually as well. I said it sounds insane, and of course I couldn't help but more than agree with her on that.
that A.W. Joseph book, what is it? Banking in Industry or the A plus B?
Well, he did an essay called the A plus B theorem.
Yeah. I've got
about 1935,
okay,
in which he outlines these things. And this one is Banking in Industry, another one that he did.
Okay, I'm going to cut across to the website, Wally. We'll lose your audio. So on the ALOR library, there it is there, and you look for Joseph on the second to right column, Banking and Industry and the A plus B theorem. Both of those booklets are there for you to look at. So yes, they're available. It's a very important consideration that, Wally, that you've only got to bake a cake, as simple as bake a cake. I mean, run your own small company, do a market or something like that. And I do bees, and I know that my profit or my spending power is not the same as what it costs to actually produce the honey, because there's bee boxes that wear out, there's plastic pots, there's extracting equipment, power, fuel going to and from, there are bee uniforms to wear. All of these things add up to the total cost of producing the honey. And my profit is only a part of that, only ever a part. Now, that's a cottage industry. It's no different. And of course, the more advanced and the more technologically advanced you get, the more that robots and machines are doing the job. And so the human involvement becomes less and less and less. We're producing these goods, but we can't actually buy these goods. And that's the anomaly. This is what we're talking about. And so savings, even if you do get paid and you decide to pay off your mortgage, which is to me is a form of saving, you continue to pay in advance on your mortgage to clear your mortgage so that you're freehold. Even that in itself is taking spending power out of the community and going back to the banks. And I know I was doing it as a young lad. I didn't like the idea of being exposed to a mortgage. And so I went after it with every penny I had and nailed it. And the sooner I was freehold, the sooner I could actually concentrate on other things other than just servicing a bank debt. And but in actual fact, understanding it now, I realised that I confiscated that money that could have been spending power in the community. And we really, really need to rethink this whole thing, this whole financial system. Robert Klinck.
Wally said we could have a marvelous future. I think the point of social credit is that we could have a marvelous present, and it's being denied to us. That we don't have to look to the future. The politicians and the financiers are always telling us that prosperity is around the corner. It will be coming if we behave ourselves and do what they recommend we should do, which involves trying to save enough money to ensure that we'll take care of ourselves at our old age. But the basis of our security is not what we can save, it's the productive capacity of our economy, and we should have full access to that. And then the preoccupation with saving would diminish drastically, because people would realize that at present and in the future, the vast productivity that the capital we have there will be a guarantee that it will be accessible to them. So the idea of encouraging savings, which governments do quite consistently, takes the focus away from the potential we're living in and narrows it to focusing on our own ability to survive at some point in the future. And it's based on this principle of sacrifice, which is inherent in the financial system and in our politics. You know, every politician, when the next election comes around, is saying, vote for me, I promise change. Well, doesn't that mean that what we have is not satisfactory? And why is it not satisfactory? And why is it never satisfactory? Why must we always have an insistence that things will change for the better? They should be for the better right now. And this, the socialists always promised a rosy future if they were going to develop things, and eventually the consumers would benefit from this. But it was always at some future point. And we're at a stage of economic evolution where we shouldn't be looking at the future. We should be looking at deriving the maximum benefits that we can from what we already have.
Yeah. Now that's a very, very profound observation, Robert, that the productive capacity that we have, our inheritance is there to be harvested, but the financial system stops it up, and quite deliberately, and if you like, malevolently, it stops it up. It has no intention of releasing that to the individual, and yet it's the very thing that Douglas talks about, and that's when Douglas was writing about the social dividend, the national dividend, consumer price subsidy, he was talking about economic democracy. He was talking about placing the security of the future firmly in the hands of, if you like, the individual, you and your brother and your sister, placing it in their hands, that each of you is entitled to choices, and there it is, that the abundance is in front of you. So it's releasing reality. That's what it's about, and it's a completely different narrative, and it's a completely different way of thinking. Wally Klinck.
Well, Arnie, I hate to tell you, but I am profoundly disappointed in my younger brother's inability to learn his lesson. Does he not understand that he has to just work harder and harder and harder? Now, this reminds me of another essay of Douglas's called The Tragedy of Human Effort, which I think is just a marvelous essay, demonstrates how human beings are exploited, expended, and worked for no good reason, because the inefficiencies that are brought into the system in order to distribute purchasing power, not to increase the efficiency of production, but just for the purpose of earning more money. But the trouble with savings too is savings keeps disappearing. You can be looking at it and it's disappearing all the time because of inflation. And inflation is the mechanism by which the benefits of modern technology in terms of efficiency are stolen from us. Because we should, if the economy is more efficient, obviously, physically, we should have a falling price level, because a falling price level means a reduction of costs for a given result. So I think, by the way, Bob, I didn't want to disturb you, but I just thought I'd use that as a point.
You have wounded me deeply.
Good, I'm glad to do it.
I've got to get on that treadmill and run harder.
Well, I hope you do. I have one here too. I guess I should use it more.
When I started work in the oil and gas industry, we had 12 people, 12 operators around the clock. There was always 12 on site. And if there was 11, they'd call someone in to make up the 12 to run the plant. And over the years, I was there 24 and a half years, we had that number reduced down to 4. Through efficiencies, through computer control, advanced control, through technology that was smarter valves, if you like, and more efficient heaters or gas burners and things like that. And so it was always about optimizing, reducing the cost of labor, reducing the human interaction, and yet we were still producing. In fact, the nameplate, the design capacity of that refinery was actually stretched because we would find different ways over the years of getting it to produce more and more and more. And so we were running faster with less and less and less. Now that illustration, which is a true indication, means that the spending power 25 years ago was distributed to 12 people, whereas over the 25 years it then became distributed to just 4 people. Now take that anomaly and you look at it and you say, well, car industries, white goods, washing machines, refrigerators, whatever, furniture factories, clothing factories, food production, it's exactly the same. More and more and more with less and less. And if people don't get the spending power through wages and dividends, salaries, they've got to get it another way. The financial system has not responded to this. It has not been adjusted. It is in dire need of a major adjustment so that we can buy what we produce. We can buy what we produce instead of having to go, in the end, overseas for expanding markets. And when it gets to the point where we're competing with China, America, Germany, France, the big players, Britain, Canada, whatever, it gets to the stage where we can't compete anymore. We've got to go and look for markets on Mars or Venus or somewhere else. That's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. We've got to put a stop to it. And the stop to it is having a look, having a rethink about how the whole financial system works. Now, don't tell me it can't be done, because China is doing it. There is a significant issue of new credits in China, and they're not necessarily insisting that the books are balanced. Now, that's for the benefit of the state, the communist tyrants, if you like, who are running that country. Canada has a history of where its publicly owned institution, the bank, did some particularly good things. And I know Australia also has a history of where the bank was doing some particularly good things to derive benefit for the individuals in community and the communities, the governments. I can think of nothing more significant strategically, militarily, than having bank, your own bank that issues new credits to the government. Why the dickens should we go cap in hand overseas to some foreign power to get issued with credits to get our own community set to work? Wally Klinck.
Well, everyone's deluded to think that if they just sell more than they bring in, that they're going to compensate for their interior or domestic shortage of purchasing power and the internal debts that they have to run up in order to try and make the system continue to function.
Yeah.
So that's the way that works. It's really cool. You got me my mind off on a little bit of a different track, but
Bring me back. Bring us back then, Wally.
you reach out and bring it back. So I was just saying that we don't in our accountancy system. We can't just issue money. We have to consider the real cost of production, and we have to have a way of accounting for the real costs of production, which are falling all the time. If we just keep issuing money to do things, we will not overcome inflation. And inflation really steals away from us the benefits of which we're trying to accrue in terms of the necessity to meet higher and higher prices, to work harder and harder to do it. So we have to have a way of crediting ourselves with our real capital. And the problem is today, again, it involves technical explanation, but we are not credited for our real capital in the way we calculate our real costs and how that should translate into falling prices. We are double charged for our capital. We're charged for our capital is our factories, our tools, those things that we use for production. They have a shelf life, and their shelf life, if the true cost of production is consumption, and they have a shelf life that lasts over a long period of time, a variable time, depending on the type of capital, could be up to a century or more, could be a few years. But the thing of it is, if we are charging ourselves for the full cost of our capital, now, when we produce it, we are not crediting ourselves for the capital that is unused. In other words, capital depreciates over time. If we pay for the whole cost of it today, we're overcharging ourselves because we haven't used it. It hasn't been used. It still exists, and it still has value. So that money should be canceled only at the rate that the real capital depreciates or wears out or obsolesces.
Yeah.
And we're being charged the full load right away. And it doesn't make sense because the capital gives us the efficiency, but by being charged the full value of it now, we're frustrating our intended ends. We're just fighting against ourselves. The financial system has to be reevaluated in terms of reality, not just abstract financial objectives and concepts and so on. We have to actually think about what it means. As I say, we have jumped out of reality into this financial world, and our whole lives are dominated by financial considerations.
Absolutely.
How many people have you met who have ever even thought that the real cost of production is consumption in material terms? Nobody thinks like that. They just think about what they see in the financial world, and they think they can beat it, or they hope they can beat it by just being a little more aggressive than the next person. But it's a fool's errand.
Yeah. In the end, that's right. Now we're at the 29-minute mark, so I'm going to start winding us up. So, Robert Klinck, your closing comments, please.
Yes, well, Wally was making the point that we have to get realistic, and there is so much abstractionism when it comes to thinking about money. I've not read many issues of The Economist, which is a publication owned by the Rothschilds, but the instances that I've looked at there, the issues, it is absolutely the worst writing I think I've ever seen in my life, yet it's the standard for the intellectual world. Anybody who has intellectual pretensions will subscribe to The Economist. But it is so abstract and I don't know, elusive and that sort of thing. It's dreadful. There's nothing concrete in the writing there. So there's this abstractionism, and it can lead to real aberrations of thought. For example, I was saying that the socialists are always promising a brighter future if we just sacrifice in the present. But on the other side, the libertarians, who are supposedly the other side of the coin from the socialists, they are constantly advocating higher interest rates. Well, higher interest rates will benefit saving, true, and they want everybody to save, but higher interest rates are an impediment for people who have businesses or consumers who want to buy products. So they're sabotaging the economy for some abstract goal, which doesn't take into account reality.
Yep. No, thank you for that, Robert. I'm visualizing in the I think it's in France, where they have a rod that is exactly 1 meter long as the standard of measurement, and I believe also somewhere not far away is the weight of 1 kilo, and they're essentially these measurements, these system of measurements, are down to the number of light waves in such an intricate and delicate and minute fashion. This is how accurately they assess things, the length and the weight. Now, surely the financial system is also a method of measurement, and we've completely abstracted it into a netherworld where it's not based on reality. We can't actually say that a loaf of bread being, if it is, 800 grams or whatever, a standard loaf of bread, this is what it should represent. And I understand that England went for hundreds of years where the price of a loaf of bread was exactly the same. And we have nothing like it. Nothing like it. So our method of measurement is so abstracted that, as I said, it's in Netherland, it's in Dreamtime. Wally Klinck.
Well, I'll tell you this. I want to emphasize, Douglas said that the consumer is actually forced through higher prices to invest in the economy. In other words, money is taken in by business to form reserves, and these reserves are supposed to secure the business for the future. But in fact, by taking the money in as reserves, it starves the consumer income. And the consumer income being starved is what can actually destroy the producer. So he's in a sense, he's preparing his own worst dream by this process of trying to make himself more secure by reserves. Mm-hmm. And that's a form of savings. We're talking about savings here. And so that is one aspect of it that I think we have to be very aware of, that the way money is taken in through prices does force the consumer to invest in industry, but that money does not become purchasing power unless it is released for further production, which is a whole new set of costs and prices. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's kind of a losing battle, and it's not even chasing your tail. It's actually going deeper and deeper into the quagmire as you move on. Mm. And so savings in that sense is, and also savings, as we said, it deprives you of the use of goods that you've already produced, while at the same time, when it is reinvested, just as I was speaking a minute ago, when it is reinvested, which is the only time it becomes purchasing power again, it will be creating again more goods and services without creating new purchasing power. It'll have new goods and services with new prices, costs and prices, but it won't be new purchasing power. It'll be another phase, separate from the first. And so that we're really in a dreadful quagmire. We're going to have to do something, because civilization cannot survive this going on endlessly. The only thing that it can result in as a failure of the free economy and a transition to a totally administered economy, a planned economy from experience, that is a disaster, because planners cannot conceive what everyone else needs or wants, and they just inevitably botch everything up because there are a few people who are trying to conceive of something that is beyond their capacity.
Mm, Yeah, no, that's well summarized, Wally. In the oil and gas industry, we've got lots of planners, and they're constantly planners, and they're schedulers and all that sort of thing. And the fact is that they do get down to minute detail, and
Mhm.
if just a slight anomaly occurs and they haven't planned for it, of course, the whole thing is thrown into chaos, and then you have to work from that chaos out.
Right.
And so how would it be? And this is just for an area, a refinery or something like that that's on several acres, whatever, 10, 20, 50 acres.
Mm-hmm.
What does the nation do? How does the nation work that out when a planner just doesn't see something, and they're not going to see it. They're only human. They don't see something, and then of course that anomaly throws everything out. And so we've got to seriously look at that thing. We have to revisit it. And as I was talking about measurements, the financial system should be as valid a form of measurement as anything else. It should reflect the productive capacity so that we're in equilibrium and we're not progressively getting further and further in debt. Gentlemen, thank you so much for today. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I always look forward to it.
Well, it's always interesting to pursue these things further, Arnie, and you can pursue them to great lengths, but there are certain very basic fundamental truths that have to come out of it to
Mm.
clarify our minds on these things so that we can refine and clarify our policies.
Thank you, Wally. Robert, thank you.
Very good, Arnie.
No worries. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.